Okay, so how many of you feel like we've got humans all figured out? Like, they're pretty simple, really, right? You know, I mean, it's like technology. It's black or white. You know, I can pretty much say, like, this is what's going to happen. So that's what this is about. That's what this is about. Humans are so innately complicated. So this is going to be a little bit of a psychoeducational course. The educational part being some of the information I'm actually going to talk to you about. So welcome back to Psych 101. Anybody take that in college? Okay. And then the psycho part, which sounds a little worse than I mean, is that, come on in, is that you're actually going to be doing some experiential pieces with that too. Just a little bit of experiential stuff. So I'm going to give you a script. Thank you for sitting up front. I didn't even have to ask. Thank you. Okay. So this concept, are we employers or are we parents, may have attracted you for different reasons. Let me hear a couple of reasons why this title resonated for you. What sticks out? Why are you here?
For me, I primarily work with very seasoned consultants who tend to have a trend of a very arrogant flair.
Interesting.
And yet I feel like I am their babysitter and their parent at times, not unlike when I was teaching ninth graders.
Interesting. So you were a teacher too.
So
Okay.
Love to transform the relationship from both perspectives if possible.
Good. Here you go, sir. Your script. Please sit at the front. And David, you are the last script. Here you go. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Why else? Why else did some of you come to this one? Are we employers or are we parents? And please sit at the front if you can. There's a lot of spaces up front over here.
So she told me if I didn't, I was
Yeah. You are in trouble. Yeah. There will be a punishment later.
I was going to say that, so what attracted me to this particular one is the fact that I deal with a lot of projects and we have a lot of different dynamics on the projects. And we have a lot of, personalities and, hold my hand, encourage me, prompt me, and I'm like, you gotta go, come on, let's go. Like, I don't have time to.
I don't have time to do all that.
Yes.
Yeah. I need you to just do your job.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Take it to a job.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay.
It's a lot of other stuff that's going on in your head, and my head is like,
Hi, welcome. Yeah, good, thank you. Thank you. One more. What attracted you specifically to are we employers or are we parents? So what attracted you to this topic?
So I'm trying to figure out what's the difference between leading nonprofit and in an organization. I find it that there is a difference, and I've been successful in one and not the other. And is there anything there that I need to look at?
Yeah, good.
Because I'm a parent in one and I'm not in the other. So
Interesting. Okay, good. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing some of that initial feedback on the title. So I'll tell you, I felt like this was an absolutely critical message to communicate, because when I first learned about a gentleman named Dr. Eric Berne, transactional analysis, this is not a new model. This is old research, quite honestly. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then it hit me like a Mack truck, like, oh my God, we do this in organizations all the time. So I hope that you find today useful, beneficial, and applicable so that you'll be able to see how to apply some of this, or at least hear it or see it when you're back in your offices. Because sometimes we get a little frustrated by the communication back to us. And that for me was the big thing. I get a little frustrated by how people are responding to me, and I'm like, what's wrong with them? Why can't they figure it out? Why can't they just get on board, or I don't have time, or whatever it is? And I, with this model, started to realize that there might be some things that I was doing that was creating the reaction that I was getting. Any of you buy into that already? Yes. Okay. So don't take my word for it. Let's do a couple of role plays. So the first one that we're going to look at, I need Tony, Sheila, and Bob. We are equal opportunity gender here. So if you got Tony, Sheila, and Bob, please come on up to the front. Okay, so let me describe the situation to you. So the situation is it's an employee orientation for a new time card system. The audience is about 50 people. Tony is the division manager, Sheila is the HR division manager, and Bob is the project engineer. So take it away, Tony.
Tony, thanks for coming today. We've got some important news to share about our new time card system. Now, I know you're probably going to struggle with this for a while, so I want you to listen really closely to what Sheila has to say today. Pay attention to all the elements she's telling you need to get done to make this work. It's important for us all to get this right. You want to get paid, don't you?
Nice, to which, okay, so Sheila says,
Thanks, Tony.
and proceeds to give a brief overview of the new time card systems with screenshot examples and a PowerPoint presentation, and says,
You'll be getting a copy of this mailed to you. It starts on June 1st, so let me know if you have any questions. I'm here to help. Does anybody have any questions now?
okay, maybe a few questions from the audience. And as people are walking out, Bob says,
Man, I don't know why they can't just keep one thing. Seems like we're always changing something that's working, and no one ever asks what I think. It's like they just don't care. Whatever.
whatever. Beautiful. Round of applause for Tony, Sheila, and Bob. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, interesting. Sound familiar? All right, so let's have Arena and Eric. Who's Arena and Eric?
I am Arena.
Okay, the situation is we've got a new employee that just started working with the company that's talking to the admin for her area to understand how to do the reimbursement for relocation. Arena's the new employee and Eric is the admin. Take it away, Arena.
No accident is going to happen now, just so you know.
Okay.
Hi, Eric. I've got some questions on how to do my reimbursements. I think I understand all of it, except how to document this extra $500 the company gave me for miscellaneous expenses.
Go ahead, Eric. Thank you.
There's a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy, but we can make this work. Technically, you're supposed to have receipts, but another way we can process it is to list separate $100 miscellaneous transactions. That amount doesn't require receipts. Welcome to the team.
Oh, there you go.
Hey, that's awesome, Eric. Thanks. It's like I'm getting a free $500.
Yep, I'm a helper. Just don't mention it to our manager. It's just how it works.
It's just how it works. Thank you, Arena and Eric. Thank you. Okay, some interesting things going on there. And Patricia and Tom. Who's Patricia and Tom? If I could get Patricia and Tom to come up. Okay, so the situation between Patricia and Tom is the VP of Marketing is working with the VP of Finance after a regional meeting. Tom is the VP of Marketing, and Patricia is the VP of Finance. Okay.
Hey Tom, good meeting. I really like the detail you shared on how you're planning to track our expenses for the year. Sounds like we've got a lot of transparency in what our plans are. Is there anything I can do in marketing to make your job easier?
Thanks, Patricia. My team has been working really hard to provide the best mechanisms for everyone to understand how their money is allocated and ultimately spent. In my last company, this was a big headache, and it's great to work with leadership that's supportive of innovation while making sure we're meeting all of our financial reporting requirements. Let's plan on getting together once a month for coffee, just to check in and see if we can support each other more than we already are.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you. Round of applause for Tom and Patricia. Okay. Are these unrealistic cases? I mean, does it sound familiar? Number two, definitely? Yeah, I can't say I used that one from direct experience. I can't. Yeah, so this does sound familiar, right? I mean, this is how we talk to each other in organizations every day. No big deal. It was effective, right? People got what they needed, right? Ultimately. Sometimes people are frustrated, sometimes they're happy. It's just the way things work, right? So let's take a look at that. So here's the psychology overview. So for the folks that came in a little bit late, this is going to be a psycho and educational program. So this is the Psych 101 part. So grab your college textbooks and hang on. This is a psychologist you might not have heard of before, Dr. Sigmund Freud. He was alive from 1856 to 1939, and one of his most popular theories to try to explain all of human behavior was the concept of the id, the ego, and ultimately the superego. He believed that our personality had these three specific components, and he was the first one to really philosophize that our personality is multifaceted. We don't just show up as the same character all the time, which on one hand is frustrating and why humans can be so difficult to understand, but on the other hand is very liberating because it allows me to show up however I'm authentically showing up at the time. So if you think about the id is sort of the irrational, emotional parts of our brain. The id just wants what it wants, right? The ego is more of the rational part of our brain, kind of trying to understand the reality of the situation and how do I fit into it. And then the superego, if you will, is like the moral part of our brain. So now how do I fit into the world and then make sure that I'm helping other people fit into the world in the best way possible too. So quick overview of Dr. Sigmund Freud, specifically because he ended up fueling a lot of the research that Dr. Eric Berne did. Dr. Eric Berne was a Canadian psychologist that was born in 1910 and died in 1970, a Canadian psychiatrist, with a long-standing ambition to add something new to the world of psychoanalysis. And based on the fact that Freud said we have multifaceted personalities, Berne wanted to research how does that relate to what's observable in people. One of the big differences is that Freud theorized what he thought happened in our personalities and then talked to people one-on-one about it. And so he kind of proved his theories by talking to people one-on-one, but it was more theoretical, whereas Berne focused on how do I observe that behavior. So the way that Berne's theory started to ultimately turn into application was a concept he called transactional analysis. How many people have heard of transactional analysis before today? Okay, so when I first heard of that, I was like, why on earth are we teaching banking terms in leadership development? Like, I don't really understand it. But that's not what he's specifically talking about. So in this case, a transaction is basically a communication. And so a transaction, I would be stimulating, I'm the transactional stimulus if I ask you a question, in which case then you might answer that question. That would be the transactional response. This is a way that he started to understand when he was working with hundreds of different people that based on our thoughts, feelings, and ultimately behaviors, we tend to show up in at least 3 different ego states in conversations, and we can change between ego states all the time. Not to be confused with the ego states that I just talked about with Freud. When Berne talks about ego states, he's more talking about the identity that I'm showing up with at the time. What type of identity am I showing up with at the time? So Berne started watching the interaction with people. So he's actually an observer watching people just communicate with each other, having these transactions, and this is how he ended up developing his theory. So why is that important? Why is that important that I'm telling you how Berne developed his theory? Well, because if it's observable, then we might be able to do something about it. You with me? Okay, so let's see. Let's see if there's something that I could ultimately do about it. So his concept is that the 3 ego states we came up with were really a parent ego state, a child ego state, and an adult ego state. So outside of transactional analysis, which is kind of that, people have heard of parent, adult, and child before. How many folks have heard of that? Okay, cool, good. All right, so the parent ego state basically starts from the moment when we're born. Right from the first day, we start to observe what our parent and parent figures, basically anyone older than us that appears with some level of authority, we start to observe what they're doing and how they're reacting to us. It's almost like a video recorder is running in the background, making recordings of all the key behaviors. So by the age of 5, we've stored about enough material for us to confidently predict how our parents or parent figures should react to us in most situations. So from a child perspective, why is that important? It's helping me to understand how I fit into the world around me. It's helping me to understand how I access things. So years later, how many of you have had this happen like, oh my God, I'm doing exactly what my mom did? That used to drive me crazy at the time, but it's like encoded in me. It literally is encoded in you. Or I'm doing that exact thing that my dad used to do. Because this is something that is how we psychologically develop based on Berne's theories. So years later, when you're a parent yourself, you may sometimes find yourself saying or doing the exact same thing that your parents did. So in the parent ego state, it's this massive library of external events that have specifically happened in those growing up years when our DNA is getting encoded, when we kind of show up with a blank slate and we're trying to figure out how do we orient ourselves in this thing called life and the place that I fit into it. There's no way for young children to ultimately filter this information, so there's no way for them to say, was that right or was that wrong? What an adult figure did, it just becomes the parent ego state. Does that make sense? Okay. So some example phrases from parents would include things like, don't talk to strangers. We've heard that one before. Hey, chew with your mouth closed. I remember my mom used to say, don't chew with your mouth open. It looks bad for girls. And I'm like, okay, I guess sure. All right, make sure you don't chew with your mouth open. Okay. Be a good boy or a good girl. What's the issue with this one? Be a good boy or be a good girl? What's good? Yes. Whatever they say is good. So I don't know if any of you have done any family of origin work in your own lives, but oh boy, that's a big one. That's like a chasm we can fall in every once in a while. Okay, so that's the parent ego state, and that's how that ends up getting recorded. So kind of in parallel, the growing child is ultimately slowly becoming aware of itself and its own needs and desires. As it develops into its own personality, the child starts to learn how certain people may react to certain behaviors and what behaviors will produce the result that they want. So they're kind of trying to figure out the secret decoder ring. How do I ultimately fit into this world, not just to understand how to fit in, but to also get what I want along the way. So it's like there's another video recording that's happening in parallel to the parent behavior that's basically recording all the feelings, the felt experience from the child, all of the feelings and responses from the child ego state. So this represents more of our internal experiences. The child ego state represents our internal events associated with some of those external experiences to reinforce that I did or I didn't end up getting the things that I wanted. The emotions that are associated with that are also recorded. So some example phrases from the child ego state might be, the monster scared me. Like, ooh, that was scary. Yelling makes me afraid. Yelling means something's wrong. Like I need to go be careful. I need to be safe. I'm not supposed to be alone. I actually like being happy. That feels good, right? Or the ice cream tasted good. So these are some examples of things that are getting encoded into our DNA from the child ego state. All right, so take both of those together, and actually still even at a pretty early age, we're beginning to understand the concept of the adult ego state. As we start to grow and develop, the adult gradually emerges. It starts to develop when we begin to exercise more control over what we do, probably from about 10 months old. The adult ego state collects information, but then analyzes that data as objectively as possible. It's almost synthesizing the child state and the parent ego state to try to figure out what makes the most sense right now. What maybe you might even say is a win-win situation. This ego state doesn't necessarily refer back to previous behaviors. It's more looking at what's the situation right now and how do I handle this situation right now. So an example of that might be, it's important to look both ways before I cross the street, which might have been something that a parent ego state or an actual parent had said to me that I picked up on, but my adult ego state is going to say, because now I can understand that car may have hit me. I get it. I can actually understand because that scared me when I was a kid. I could see that car might have hit me, and so now I've synthesized these two together. Okay. So in a quick review, the parent ego state is sort of the taught concept, right or wrong, it's the taught concept. The child ego state ends up being the felt concept, kind of the emotional concept. And then the adult ego state ends up being the learned concept. And all of this comes from Dr. Eric Berne's work. One of his major books is Games People Play, and then Transactional Analysis in Psychotherapy. And there are some good websites that have top-level detail. Okay, so why are we talking about all of this? Why are we actually ultimately talking about all this? You heard this before? Perception is reality? Yeah. So depending on what I walk in with, honestly, sometimes I'm a recovering engineer, And so I always used to think like things are pretty simple. We can always figure it out. But when I started doing a little bit more research on myself, I'm like, man, beep, beep, like back the truck in, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to get dumped there. And then we try to figure out like, why am I doing things the way I'm doing things? And it can go back to things that were coded in me. It's almost a process that's running in the background. My hard drive, unfortunately, crashed. I got the blue screen to death, and then I got a gray screen that said the computer doesn't even know how to operate because your operating system has been wiped. And I'm thinking to myself, like, yeah, a little scary, interesting. New computer, I like it. But I didn't realize that there was this whole operating system running in the background that enabled me to do all the things that I was doing. But that's really kind of the way we're wired, too. So if perception is really right, let's focus on this word. Right. Any of you get wrapped around the axle? I know I do. I did, I may still. I'm working on resiliency around that. So what really is right? For sure, 100%, black and white, without a doubt, always the same, right. What's an example? 100% black and white all the time. This is right. Gravity. Gravity. Is that the same in space? Good analogy. Good one. Good try. Who's next? Say again?
Your name.
My name, unless I change it. Good. 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 Yeah. True. Yes. The earth is round. Yeah. Okay, I like that one. So there are a couple things, but in office environments or in relationships, whatever you're considering, how often do we get wrapped around the axle on right? I know I did a lot. You know, they're not doing it right. He didn't do it right. She didn't do it right. I didn't do it right. But what really is right anyway? So when you think about this concept of perception as reality, I may have been right then for me, with the information I had at the time, which could be completely different 24 hours from now. So I only bring that up because I think that's important for us to consider as we think about these different ego states when we're talking to each other. Another example of what's really right, anybody remember the Lockheed Martin satellite that flew to Mars? This was probably 15, 20 years ago. Flew all the way out to Mars. It was going to basically take pictures of the surface of Mars. Anybody remember what happened to that satellite? You know, millions, maybe billions of dollars in 6 months.
Slight miscalculation on the orbital approach.
Slight miscalculation on the orbital approach. Therefore, it crashed into the planet.
Which made it slammed into the planet.
Which made it slam into the planet. Do you remember what the calculation issue was? Metric versus English units.
Yeah.
There's an example. Math. That's normally a good example. That is right or it's wrong. That's black and white. It normally is pretty black and white. We like to be creative with it, like, hey, 2 + 2 = 5. You know? Not really, actually, from a math perspective anyway. Okay. So let's get back to Eric Berne and just investigate this transactional analysis perspective more. So the way that he modeled it, so he basically said, I could be any of these 3 states as I begin a conversation with you. So I could be coming from a parent state, I could be coming from an adult state, I could be coming from a child state. And then ultimately, how I respond, how I talk to you may create a stimulated response from you to talk back to me in the way that I just talked to you. So most of the time, we like to say that it's adult-to-adult conversation, you know? So I said, hey, you walk in, how you doing today? Good, how are things going? Good, how's business? The kids, fantastic. Oh, that's great. That's pretty much adult-to-adult conversation, right? How many of you noticed when I said, can you please move up to the front? But there's still seats open at the front. If you want to sit up here, it'll be better. It'll be easier for you. What state might I have been coming from? Little bit of parent, like I know better. This is gonna work out, right? And for any of you that might have had an emotional response to that, I don't know. Yeah, the child in you might have been like, I'm fine where I'm at. Thanks, appreciate it. Speaking of, did everybody get a handout? Because I did only put handouts on the front 3 rows, just to reward those of you that did sit in the front. Okay, yeah, okay. If you don't have a handout, can you raise your hand just so we make sure you get one? Okay. So the handout's a place for you to take notes, and it's kind of a reference for you for later too. Now, it doesn't mean that the parent to the child response is inappropriate. It doesn't mean that a child to a parent response is inappropriate. It just means that there's a time and a place for it. For example, even in his book, he used a relationship. I'm going to do one more thing before I do that. So let's just think about this. Let's think about this based on the 3 different skits that we saw when we first came in this morning. So what felt like parent to child, child to parent, or adult to adult communication. So I want you to think about the 3 different folks that came in and came up and talked to each other. Who ended up having an adult to an adult conversation?
I think it was
Patricia and Tom?
Yeah, so how they could be a support to one another and actually be for each other. That seems a lot more adult than some of the conversations I had.
How could they be supportive to one another? How could they really be for each other? They kind of synthesized, maybe both their needs with what the other person needs. The felt response, the taught response, and then ultimately the learned response. Good. Anything else? Anybody else?
The most collaborative as well.
How do we know this? See, you guys already know this. I really didn't create these to be difficult. I created them because I thought this is actually communication that I've seen come up quite a bit. So I would agree. I would say for the most part, let me just go back real quickly. I think my slides are a little bit off there. No. So back to the model, sometimes parent to child is appropriate. So if a feverish child screams out, "Mom, Mom, can you give me a glass of water?" What's the mother probably going to do? Like, oh my gosh, absolutely. I can tell you're not feeling good, Bobby. What else can I get you, sweetie? I hope you get to feeling better. That's a totally normal response. That's a normal triggered parent to child response or child to parent response. What can happen is instead of having an adult to adult response, which is I think what we ended up seeing in some of the communication today, sometimes I can have a response that comes out differently. For example, let's say that a couple, the husband says to the wife, he says, "Honey, do you know where the scissors are?" And the wife says, "You always blame me for everything." Right? Does that actually happen? Okay, so what he just did is he basically said, I'm just asking you where the scissors are, but she fired back, she got triggered for some reason, and so this is called a crossed response in Eric Berne's work. So this happens sometimes. What happens in a cross response, and this is what's cool, because if I can observe it, then I can do something about it. If I am emotionally aware of what might have just gotten triggered for her, I can potentially stop it from triggering me. Now, if I choose not to stop it, I'm not aware, and the wife says, "You always blame me for everything," what's a typical response that might come out?
Well, couldn't you have a childish reaction as well?
Yeah. So she just responded from a child to a parent perspective. So his natural response would be, well, if you were more organized, maybe we would know where the scissors were. Okay? Right? Like we know this. We know this kind of stuff happens. However, if he was aware of it, he could go back to the adult to see if he could re-trigger the adult for her and say, "Wow, honey, I was just wondering where the scissors were. What's going on? Sounds like that triggered you for some reason. I'm not blaming you for anything, but that sounds like it triggered you for some reason." And that's how I can get back to an adult-to-adult communication. So we must ultimately look beyond what's being said. And this is where Eric Berne's work fueled another gentleman's work who I think you might have heard of before. How many of you folks know the name Morabian? Albert Morabian. Okay, if you don't know his name, you probably know his work. Albert Morabian used some of the stuff that Eric Berne was doing to say, now how can I start to pay attention to specifically 3 different ways that I may or may not be effectively communicating with each other. He looked at verbals, nonverbals, and tone and inflection. So you probably know this chart. How many of you know this? So the largest percentage, based on his research of just people having conversations, was that for the most part, 55% of the effectiveness of how we're talking to each other comes across in my nonverbals, comes across in the things that I'm not even saying. What does that mean? What does that mean to somebody in the audience? What does nonverbal specifically mean? What's an example? Facial expression, what else? Posture, body language. Yeah, would it be a little awkward if I did this? Yeah. I'm really happy to see you guys, but I actually went to a presentation one time and somebody literally, like, they stood right here and read the slides. Like, it was so awkward. I didn't get a lot out of that. Yes? Silence is a nonverbal. Yeah. Yeah. So our nonverbals are communicating more loudly than the words we're using or the tone and inflections. The second runner-up is what? Tone and inflection. Yeah. So sometimes what I use in my leadership development courses is I'll put an example up. I'll just put a phrase that says, "This is the best job I've ever had." And we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words in that sentence. And then I'll pick 7 people and I'll say, I want you to emphasize the word that matches the number that you are. And in some cases, the sentence is the same. It says the same thing. This is the best job I've ever had. This is the best job I've ever had. This is the best job I've ever had. Which makes me think, what? This might be your first job. Okay? This is the best job I've ever had. Thanks, I'll take that letter of resignation now. Okay, right? It totally changes the sentence. So it's the exact same words. So this is real. Now there is a term that I've heard recently called the Moravian myths. Anybody heard of that before too? So I didn't even know that was out there, but some people are saying like, no, that's not accurate. Because he wasn't specifically looking at like technical conversations with people. He was just looking at people that were having a felt response of some kind based on the conversation. So I challenge you to consider, are technical conversations really that different? Maybe the percentages aren't exactly the same, but I have a feeling we're in the ballpark. I have a feeling that nonverbals and tone and inflection are probably still outweighing the actual words that we use, even in technical conversations, even if the ratios are a little bit different. Okay, so now back to what I was jumping ahead to do in the first place. So now let's take a look at the 3 case studies that we looked at this morning, the 3 skits, at the beginning of the presentation. Okay, so Tony, Sheila, and Bob. So what's happening with Tony, Sheila, and Bob? So Tony starts it off. Where did Tony come from? And why do you say that? Why do you think Tony came from a parent ego state? You got to do this. Yeah, what else?
Pay attention.
Now pay attention. Yeah, move up to the front row. And he said, I know you're probably not going to like this.
And that's a great teacher look to give, by the way.
Yeah.
Really practice that.
So Tony started from a parent perspective. And being the lead manager in the room, so that can sometimes set the tone, right? All right. How about Sheila? What did Sheila do? Yes, Sheila was pretty much like, here's the information. Do you have any questions? I'm available. You're all going to get a copy of this. Yeah, Sheila seemed like she was coming from the adult side. Now, this is what makes it tricky. Sometimes people, even though Sheila was coming from an adult perspective, sometimes people are going to go back and talk to Sheila about that new time card system from what state based on how Tony kicked it off. Yeah, and so Sheila's going to be like, what's your problem? You know, like I've done everything I need to do. So we've got to really pay attention to how am I reacting to what someone is ultimately triggering so that I can get a different response back from them. It's like a secret decoder ring. I had no idea, really, it could be this simple. So then ultimately Bob did what? Yeah, so Bob reacted from the child state with the most common word, I think, in the English language for anybody under the age of 40 now. Like, whatever. Yeah. They don't really care anyway. Okay. How about Arena and Eric? Because we basically said the middle 2 were, or the last 2 were adult to adult. How about Arena and Eric? Was this adult to adult?
I didn't feel like it started off bad, but I definitely felt more like a kid in the last response. No way.
Interesting. What do you think? What do you think? Adult to adult? Parent to child? Child to parent? This is a tricky one. This is kind of a tricky one. I threw that in there on purpose. Who knows? Again, based on what Albert Moravian's work said, it might depend a lot on my nonverbals and the tone and inflection I was using, not just the words. Thank you so much for reading those scripts as well as you did. So I would say there's a chance that was adult to adult communication. You know, really, Arena had a question. Eric answered the question in the best way he knew how. Everybody was happy at the end. However, what's Arena set up to do now? Because basically we're talking about embezzlement, you know, just that. But what's Arena set up to do now? She's set up to cheat the system. So at some point, somebody might say to her, by the way, you can't do that. That's dishonest. That's cheating the system. That's kind of embezzlement. That's stealing from the company. And she's going to say, Eric told me to do it. He said it was okay. So that might, even though Eric Berne's work said that it's the stuff that happens between 0 and 5, I don't think it's just the stuff that happens between 0 and 5. It's our learned experiences along the way and how we felt about different things that are going to come up again and again in our organizations and how we talk to each other. So that's how it all works. Good. So now that you know this, we got it all figured out, right? You know what to do going forward. I told you, humans are simple at the beginning. We're pretty easy to figure out. Most of you probably have it figured out already. No, we're really not simple. And the truth is we're going to get re-triggered by things all the time. Our mission is to try to pay more attention to what's happening so that I can respond to it from the state that I would prefer to respond from. So I'm not saying that it's wrong for you to respond from a child state or it's wrong for you to respond from a parent state. But if you want to create a different conversation with people, you might want to change the way that you're reacting, which is hard work. Almost think of it like a rubber band. I've got to have a rubber band on my wrist that when I feel that like, that trigger, maybe even that felt response in my body, like I get angry, my heart starts pounding, or my voice starts shaking, or I start to get kind of hot, or whatever it is, how can you have almost like a rubber band on your wrist that snaps it and goes, hold on, what did I just get triggered by? And how can I respond in the way that I want to, in my greatest integrity, as opposed to just responding to that trigger that came up. So I'm not saying that this is easy, but let's practice a little bit more. What do you think? Okay. So I'd like to have now Angela and Juan. Who's Angela and Juan? Okay, so the situation is Juan just found out he's not going to get the promotion to run the research lab. His boss, Angela, is giving him the news. Take it away, Angela.
Juan, I want you to know that you're doing a really great job here. The company really appreciates you. Even though you were eligible for the promotion to senior researcher, we just didn't feel like you were quite ready for it. I'd like to brainstorm with you about all the things that you could do to be ready in the future.
To which Juan says,
Wow, seriously? I just got my lab analysis quality control training, and I thought that would be a sure sign that I'm ready for this next level. You even said yourself I'm doing a good job here. Sounds like something else is going on.
No, there's nothing else going on. We just want to make sure you're prepared for it. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Juan. You know how much I like working with you. You know, it's just that Bob hasn't been able to see how good of an employee you are like I have. I'm sorry. I should have tried harder to make this happen for you.
That's what I figured. I knew Bob didn't like me. I'm never going to work with him again if I can help it. Clearly, he holds grudges.
Okay, so quick round of applause for Juan and Angela. Thank you. So let's analyze that. So what's the ego state here? Where did Angela come from? Yeah, pretty adult. She was trying to be pretty clear, communicate information. What happened over here? Uh-huh.
She reacted as a parent.
Well, now what would you say, just to get into the weeds of it, what would you say was the child response here? If you can pick out some words. I know we saw a little bit. The word seriously. Yeah, wow, seriously? You even said yourself, hey, you told me to do it. Uh-huh. So we can see this. So if I can observe the communication style, I can change what I do about it. So then what happened? With Angela? Yeah, so now Angela's like, oh God, you got me. Like, one, I wasn't comfortable with this conversation anyway, and like, you're totally right. This place is awful. Let's just leave. Yes, ma'am.
But it seems like she sort of was putting the blame on Bob.
Can you say it again louder?
It seemed like she was putting the blame on Bob.
She was putting the blame on Bob.
Instead of maybe focus on maybe the feedback she got from Bob, not mentioning his name.
Mhm.
But it's like, I'm sorry, I
Mhm.
should have done with Bob. So clearly, she's gonna go straight to Bob. I knew you didn't like me anyway.
Yeah. So what's actually happening with Angela? What is this? Is this parent? It's actually both. Angela did parent, and then she switched to child pretty quickly, which is what Eric Berne said. We can switch our ego states, and then what happened? And then Juan, of course, says, he's taking his toys and going home. That's right. That's right. So the truth is, we have no idea what's happened in the past for Angela or Bob. Angela may have had a performance review go way wrong before, and so she is scared to death to be able to do this well. So she may have some of her own emotional triggers that are coming up. Juan, who knows, may have had a diversity issue in his past of like, man, there it is again. I expected Bob not to like me, and sure enough, he doesn't. Now it's proven. So that goes back to kind of what Eric Berne was saying, that I'm getting triggered by different things. And it doesn't mean we aren't still going to get triggered, but I always think awareness is half the battle. If I can just become more aware of the things that are triggering me, I have the opportunity to do something about it. Okay, so in your handouts, on the page behind the notes there, you have sort of the secret decoder ring for this so that you can apply it going forward. And the way that the model is split up, you basically can still see the P, the A, and the C here that we've just been looking at. So the parent state, the adult state, and the child state. But what's interesting is this line here and this line up here are basically saying these are the things that are positive behaviors. You know, it's absolutely okay and appropriate sometimes for an adult state to talk to a child state, or a parent state to talk to an adult state, or a child state, whatever, to talk to a parent state. It's absolutely appropriate to do that. These are some of the positive behaviors. However, sometimes we get into, on the other side of the line, we get into some of these negative behaviors. So let's just take a look at this critical controlling parent. Domineering, controlling, criticizing. What does that make you think of in organizations? Have you seen this before? Yes. Yeah, and what kind of manager? Micro manager. We even have a name for it. Yeah.
Well, to elaborate, I think you have managers that are really good at making, let's say, widgets or what they do. Because they're good at what they do, they get promoted to being a manager, but have no skill of actually dealing with people.
Yeah.
Hence the domineering and controlling.
Very little awareness. They have very little awareness. So we can't really expect them to know too much if we haven't helped them grow their own awareness. Absolutely. How about this one? Smothering, inconsistent, dithering. The nurturing parent. Do we have a name for that?
Tiger Mom comes to mind.
Well, Tiger Mom might actually be over here. But what about this one? Helicopter parent? Does that sound familiar? Is that what you were thinking of? Helicopter parent? We have a name for that one too. Because we see it happen so much. And what about here? So if I get the micromanager, let's actually use this from an employee perspective. If I get the micromanager a lot, who might show up?
Someone who can't be independent or do anything on their own.
So I've got adapted child or potentially free child. The free child's the one that might be more rebellious, like I'm going to do whatever I want. The adapted child's like, ugh, man, you told me like steps 1 through 99, and then you said, yeah, but you can play with step 100, you know? And I'm like, man, whatever. Just tell me what you want me to do. So you might get the adapted child that shows up with the critical controlling parent to a point. And then at some point, that adapted child is going to say, I don't even want to be here anymore. I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm going to go live my own life. We can actually watch this happen. We can watch this happen. So in your handouts, this is repeated there. This graphic is repeated, and it's basically showing what some of the disabling or the negative behaviors are between critical controlling and nurturing parents, or the unproductive behaviors for free child or adapted child, just so that you can pay more attention to it. Okay. One more example. and we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. All right, so let's try this together. Who's Prakash and Jim? All right, so the situation is Prakash and Jim both work together on an IT project. Prakash is the team lead for the project. Take it away, Prakash.
Hey, Jim, I need you to give me a status of the project. What about timelines, major risks, and who are you interfacing with on a regular basis? Also, when you have to work any extra time on it, I need you to tell me ahead of time that you're doing that and exactly what you're doing.
Sure, Prakash, I'm swamped in getting the project done in the first place. I'll make sure you get this, too.
Yeah, nice, yeah, nice, well done, well done. Have we heard this before? Yeah, we hear it all the time. So what's happening? Now that we've looked at it, instead of just parent or child, tell me critical controlling parent or nurturing parent, tell me free child or adapted child. Because we know it's parent-child. So where did Prakash come from? Micromanagement, which was the critical controlling parent. And how do we know that? How did I see that? I, of course, saw it, and thank you very much for your good performances, gentlemen. I certainly saw it in some of the tone and inflection and some of the nonverbals, but even just in the words, where do I know that? Where do I know that Prakash is coming?
Specific, incredibly specific.
It's incredibly specific. I mean, on one hand, this comes across as maybe being an adult, potentially. Joe goes, no, actually, I don't. They come in and they poop all over the place. Yeah. So this one, I need you to tell me ahead of time that you're doing that and exactly why you're doing that. Again, that's not an unusual request in organizations, because how am I supposed to plan my budget if I don't know what's coming? So I've actually heard this case come up many times in my coaching work with folks.
Yeah, this was different. The tone of this was, you need to give me a justification as opposed to, hey, this would be really helpful so I know what projections.
Good, yeah. Keep it a little softer. Soften the front a little bit, good. So where did Jim come from then? The adapted child. And David, he's, okay, just tell me whatever you need me to do. Great. Now I just got back to paying for butts in seats, not minds in seats. Yeah, and that's much more expensive. Okay, so I don't want to move to that yet. So how much time do we have? We doing okay on time? Got about 5 minutes? Okay, good. So give me an example. Tell me how has this resonated for you? Of course, didactic learning, you're processing all this stuff while I'm talking. Yes, Joe.
So first and foremost, I apologize. I was not here for the whole entire session because I wanted to be conference call, but
I'll make sure you get punished later. Just to be clear.
but in this situation right here, I call it flock of seagulls because it's like the seagull swoops in. If this is like a 5-minute conversation where they come by the cube, ask all this and leave, and then you get Jim's response, and they're like, oh, we're fine, we're good for the project, and then you get scope creep, and then you decline, but well, Jim said we were good, but because of all the dynamics you're talking about, come into play.
What's your question?
So my question is this. Okay. Sorry. I'm affirming, and then.
Okay.
But my question comes in. I feel like colleges, universities, certificates are just failing at giving young leaders, or even leaders at any point in time that are going for education, the right skill set to actually be at adult level. You're just getting certified with a degree or a piece of paper, and then you go into a corporate culture, and then you got it. There's some sort of essence of how do you help that young adult, so to speak, transition into being an adult professional that managers sometimes miss. And I'm just curious what ideas or thoughts or what groupthink has to that, because that's just plaguing my mind as a current issue for the workforce.
Yeah. And it's certainly not just age specific, right? Because it's not like college students don't have some of these skills already. They do. We actually started developing our adult ego state pretty early in our lives. But what got reinforced as I was growing up? What do you think? What tends to get reinforced for you?
I want to make sure I understand this. So is the question, Like, what tips do you have to help teach this skill set?
So I would say colleges or degree programs or institutions teach us how to be academics, for lack of a better term. So you know the theory, you know the content. What actually comes into the world of work and having those right adult conversations, the communication pieces, to where there's just gaps, whether managers who maybe shouldn't be managers, and maybe people who are put in positions that have all the right qualifications but not the skill sets. How do we as professionals, as talent professionals, really help acknowledge that this is a bad conversation that was had? How do we address it? How do we bring it to that adult level that you were talking about, Laurie? Does that clarify?
I think so, yeah. I think I'll answer your question as well as yours at the same time. For myself, I feel like I've been trained by a particular individual who's extremely tenured and seasoned. Like, I'll ask 3 questions and I'll either get no response or I'll get one answer and the other 2. So I think I react as a parent because it's like, Jesus, you can't act like an adult. It's like, let me spell out, oh, and what about the other 2 answers I'm looking for? Which doesn't seem like it's very productive. So in this case, how I would digest this or alter my approach, I can see going back to the person and saying, I want to acknowledge, I'm not sure I had the healthiest response to this, or I'm sure I would massage it word-wise, but acknowledge that I don't think my approach worked, and here's what I'm committed to. I'm committed that I give you the information and give what you need so that you're successful, and I want you to know why I'm asking these questions, what difference it's going to make, and how I need you to partner with me. I think that would be a way to model maybe my own growth and development without going like, look what you did.
Right, without just re-triggering everything again.
Exactly, but trying to break
Good, let's move on to another example. What's another example? Yeah.
I think the key is just knowing what your triggers are.
Yes.
And just like in this example, I felt the trigger just, I need you to, or you know what you need to do. When anyone's like, you need to, that authoritarian parent I grew up with is suddenly there and I'm the child and I'm like, oh no.
And it brings a whole lot more stuff. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yes, that's a really good way to say it. What is it that I'm ultimately triggered by, and how can I become more aware of that in the future? So we have just a couple minutes left. I'm available if you want to keep talking, because I think this subject, it applies everywhere. It applies in families, it applies in universities, it applies in organizations, in churches, in any type of communication that we have with each other. It's a tool to help you grow your own awareness, maybe the awareness of others too, by changing the response that you get, if you can be aware of it. So in a world of a million different things that are going on at the same time, consider, is this something that I want to do, or is this something that I have to do? And either way, if it's just a checkbox for you, you may not be growing quite as much awareness, but at least you're getting a little bit further with it. But hopefully it's something that you ultimately want to do, which creates a staircase of growing your awareness one conversation at a time. Because there is no global program that's going to fix this. It's one transaction at a time that's going to make a difference. So one of my favorite things is Howard Thurman's quote, don't ask yourself what the world needs, ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive and grown their awareness. Thank you.